Hi folks, it's time again for the All Good Things Star Trek podcast, Canon Eggs for Star Trek Discovery, Episode 8, CV's Pacem, Bellum. My name is Barry Wallace, I'm co-host of the All Good Things Star Trek podcast. It is time for another episode. We don't have very many Canon Eggs again this week. I think we'll probably slack off a little bit as time goes on. But we're here to talk about them, so let's get started. First of all, it's not really Canon Egg, but the translation for the title, in case you were wondering, means if you want peace, prepare for war. Is what Civis Pacem Parabellum means. It's a Latin phrase, common Latin phrase, but that's what it means. So it makes a whole lot of sense going to a planet that is dedicated to peace and harmony and all those kind of things. So the first thing that we hear, I don't think I've mentioned this before in the podcast, and maybe I just missed it, but Kove, the Klingon emperor styling, whoever he styles himself to be, is the House of Kor. Now, you may remember Kor, K-O-R, is a very famous Klingon. In fact, he's the very first Klingon that Star Trek ever introduced back in Season 1 of the original series, Errand of Mercy, who's played by John Colicos. And he actually showed up again in at least two episodes of Deep Space Nine as a much, much older version of himself. Of course, you remember he had a friendship with Koloth and Kang of the Klingons, and he, together with Jadzia Dax, went to search for Albino, and a complete story, Blood Oath, and there's several other episodes of Deep Space Nine. Anyway, Kor is the house that is leading the Empire at the moment. So will we see Kor himself? Will we get a reference to him? Of course, 10 years from now in TOS is when he will appear and meet Kirk at Organia for Errand of Mercy. So who knows what he's doing at this point. He himself may just be a junior officer. Moving on, the Gagarin is one of the ships, is the first ship that we see that is destroyed by the Klingons. Of course, it's named after Yuri Gagarin, famous astronaut. There were also a couple of other Yuri Gagarin ships in Star Trek. In the Next Generation, the episode Measure of a Man is the 24th century version of the Yuri Gagarin, USS Gagarin. It's on neutral zone patrol, apparently mentioned at one point in the episode on a display board. And then there's also another VK Yuri Gagarin, which was in the episode Up the Long Ladder from the TNG also. So it mentioned in a couple of TNG episodes some later versions of the Gagarin. We may have heard Burnham mention the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one in her conversation there on the show. Of course, we heard that first in Star Trek II and Star Trek III, Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock. Seems to be a Vulcan mantra, or a real key tenet to Vulcan philosophy, is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Of course, Kirk turned that around in 3 and Search for Spock, meaning the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the few or the many. So there are a couple of different interpretations of that depending on who you talk to. We also heard Burnham use the famous Klingon curse or reference to a Ptak. We heard Worf and other Klingons have used that all throughout Star Trek, modern Star Trek history. So if you heard that, you've probably heard it many times before. Also, going back to some of the other ships that were part of the defense force, that the Gagarin was one of those ships, was the Murok. And the Murok, there's a character named Murok who was a Vulcan officer in an old Enterprise episode called Ceasefire. So it's possible that ship could have been named after him. Obviously, Discovery is taking place a number of years after Enterprise. And the other one named was the USS Hoover. I think the popular thinking on that one is there was an astronaut, a U.S. Air Force astronaut, whose name was Bob Hoover. He was a famous pilot, and by many people considered to be maybe one of the best pilots of all time. So that is most likely what that starship is named after. That is really all of the Canon Eggs that we have this week. I wanted to talk just really briefly about the theme of the episode, of the Pavian spores, or not really spores, but they reminded me a lot of the spores from this side of paradise, from TOS, where these plant spores infected the people that lived on the planet, Omicron Ceti 3, and of course the Enterprise and Kirk and Spock went to that planet. Spock was infected, became all peace and love and harmony. Let's stay on the planet and live out our lives. The theme of that episode, whether one should stay for the rest of their lives in peace with each other in harmony or go back into the world where supposedly they belong, was a very similar theme to this episode, that Saru had to come to his senses, so to speak, and make that decision himself. It wasn't necessarily infected by the spores, so there's a big difference. He wasn't taken over by them and didn't have to get rid of them by strong emotions like they did in This Side of Paradise. He actually was tempted. I think it was a much different type of situation, but the two backgrounds were very similar. And if you noticed that, or if you thought this sounds a little familiar, that's probably what that episode reminded you of, was This Side of Paradise. Finally, one last thing. A lot of people have been talking about the name of the planet, or the name of the people on the planet, or the creatures, or the entities, the Param, now I can't remember the name of the planet. It was, Pavo, excuse me, totally forgot that. Some people are speculating that Pa may refer to the Pa Wraiths from Deep Space Nine, which are the counterparts of the prophets that lived in the wormhole. I'm kind of tending to discount this a little bit. I think it may be just a coincidence of the names. The Pa, P-A-H, was the term that the Bajorans used for, I believe, the Bajoran soul, or at least the Bajoran's life essence. You remember in the very first episode of Deep Space Nine, an emissary, Kai Opaka, did the little ear thing to Ben Sisko and said, your Pa is strong, or your life force, or your energy, or your spiritual force. And we saw that a number of times throughout DS9. It's very possible, I mean, I'll admit it's possible that the two may be interconnected. There may be something to do with this planet in this episode. All right, that will do it for another week. Don't forget, the All Good Things Star Trek podcast. You can contact us at agtpod@gmail.com, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube on agtpod, and allgoodthings.podbean.com is the website for past podcast episodes. Until next time, see you then.